announcing today a major show of military force in the region.
On a quiet day in the North Atlantic, near the icy waters of Greenland, an unimaginable event unfolds that could change the course of global history. The massive nuclear-powered USS Gerald R. Ford, the pride of the United States Navy, is under attack. It's a ship designed to project power, with enough firepower to alter the balance of military forces across continents. But today, it finds itself facing an unprecedented threat from an unexpected adversary. Iran, a country that has long harbored tensions with the United States, has launched a calculated, bold military strike on one of the most powerful warships in the world. And not just any strike. This is a complex, multifaceted assault, involving a combination of Iranian naval vessels, submarines, and missile systems, all coordinated with chilling precision. What are they after? What do they hope to achieve by taking on the USS Gerald R. Ford in such a dramatic fashion, so far from their shores? As the ship enters the critical zone near Greenland, thought to be a relatively secure part of the world's oceans, the attack begins. The first missile hits, followed by a flurry of naval maneuvers from Iranian ships lurking beneath the surface. The Gerald R. Ford's advanced radar systems detect the incoming threat too late. The U.S. Navy responds quickly, but the sheer scale of the Iranian attack takes even the Pentagon by surprise. Is this an isolated incident? Or has Iran just taken a bold step toward a larger, more dangerous escalation of conflict? With the eyes of the world focused on the unfolding crisis, Washington orders an immediate naval response. U.S. warships, submarines, and aircraft are scrambled as the Pentagon scrambles to control the situation, aware that the attack on the USS Gerald R. Ford could trigger a chain reaction of unprecedented proportions. But Iran is no stranger to bold moves. They have long sought to challenge U.S. dominance in the region, and this could be their most aggressive move yet. But who's really behind this? What drives Iran to make such a risky decision? And what's at stake for the global balance of power if this attack succeeds? This isn't just a military skirmish. This is about strategy, dominance, and power on a global stage. With tensions already high in the Middle East, this sudden attack could reshape not only U.S.-Iran relations, but also the geopolitical landscape for decades to come. In this video, we'll break down the details of the attack on the USS Gerald R. Ford, look at the strategic implications for the U.S. and Iran, and explore how this could trigger a new era of naval warfare. From the missile strikes to the secretive movements of Iranian submarines, we'll take you step by step through one of the most daring military operations in modern history. Stay tuned as we uncover the truth behind this attack, its potential consequences, and what it means for the world moving forward. Could this be the beginning of a new chapter in military conflict? Or will diplomacy intervene before it's too late? Let's dive into the heart of this international crisis. The incident that unfolded near Greenland in the North Atlantic on that fateful day was not just an isolated skirmish. It marked a chilling moment in history when global military tensions reached a boiling point. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the flagship of the United States Navy, was on a routine patrol in one of the most strategically important regions of the world. This colossal vessel, boasting the latest in military technology and an air wing capable of striking targets across entire continents, was not only a symbol of American military power, but also a cornerstone of NATO's defense posture in the Arctic. Its presence in the region was, for the most part, considered a given, a show of strength in a largely peaceful zone. But peace would not last. The North Atlantic, especially the waters near Greenland, has long been an area of immense strategic importance. The region serves as a vital link between Europe and North America, and lies close to critical shipping lanes. Moreover, Greenland's proximity to the Arctic Circle makes it a region of high military significance. The U.S. has maintained a military presence there for decades, with its early warning radar systems and missile defense installations. The USS Gerald R. Ford's deployment to this region was no surprise, and its purpose was clear: to ensure that American power remained present and unchallenged, particularly in the face of rising tensions from adversaries like Russia and, more increasingly, Iran. But what no one could have predicted was the audacity of the attack that would follow. On a seemingly calm morning, As the Gerald R. Ford sailed along its planned course, a sudden surge of activity was detected on American radar systems. At first, the crew dismissed it as a routine fluctuation in the ocean's currents. However, the unusual readings persisted, with multiple unidentified objects rapidly closing in on the vessel. By the time the ship's defense systems activated, it was already too late. Iranian naval forces, operating well beyond their usual patrol zones, had launched a calculated and surprise assault on the ship. The attack was not merely a single missile strike. Instead, it was a coordinated effort involving a mix of Iranian military assets. Reports later revealed that 2 Iranian submarines, Kilo-class boats, had silently positioned themselves beneath the surface, their torpedo tubes ready to strike. Meanwhile, 2 Iranian frigates, disguised as civilian vessels, moved closer to the Gerald R. Ford from different angles, each armed with a new, highly accurate cruise missile developed in secret. The missiles, though still in the experimental phase, had reportedly been tested in covert operations within the Persian Gulf, but this was their first real-world test against a major military target. At 9:23 a.m., the first missile launched from a frigate, its trajectory aimed at the forward section of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The ship's radar systems detected the missile only moments before it reached the vessel. However, due to the sheer speed and proximity of the attack, the ship's anti-missile defenses struggled to intercept the incoming threat. The missile struck the aircraft hangar with a deafening explosion, sending a fireball into the sky. Smoke and debris flooded the deck as the ship's crew scrambled to counteract the damage. But this was only the beginning. As the crew of the USS Gerald R. Ford attempted to regain control of the situation, the second wave of Iranian assets made their move. The 2 submarines, having launched torpedoes, emerged from the depths. The sheer audacity of these maneuvers stunned even the most seasoned military analysts. No one had expected such a high-risk operation so far from Iranian waters. These submarines, cloaked by the cold depths of the North Atlantic, launched their payloads within minutes of the first missile strike. By the time the Pentagon became aware of the scale of the attack, it was already too late for a quick response. The strike on the USS Gerald R. Ford was not simply a random act of aggression. It was a carefully planned operation designed to send a message. The intent was clear. Iran was challenging the United States directly, asserting that it could strike at the heart of American military power, even in the most well-protected corners of the world. This was not just an isolated attack. It was a declaration of power, aimed at destabilizing the region and testing the limits of American resolve. As the smoke cleared on the Gerald R. Ford, the global community was left in shock. This wasn't just an attack on a warship. It was an assault on the very idea of American military dominance. The Pentagon immediately issued a statement, acknowledging the gravity of the situation and promising swift retaliation. But the damage had been done. Iran had sent a clear and unambiguous message, one that would not be easily forgotten by those who watched the events unfold. The question remained, what would the United States do next? As the attack on the USS Gerald R. Ford unfolded, the world watched in disbelief as one of the most powerful warships in the U.S. Navy found itself under a brutal assault from Iranian forces. The first signs of trouble came when the ship's radar systems picked up unusual signals emanating from a group of vessels that appeared out of nowhere on the horizon. Initially, the crew believed these were just regular maritime traffic, but the readings were strange. A fleet of Iranian ships, 3 frigates, 2 submarines, and a support vessel was moving with alarming precision toward the USS Gerald R. Ford. The U.S. Navy was accustomed to operating in volatile regions, but this was different. The aggressive and unexpected nature of the assault suggested a well-coordinated plan, far more calculated than any typical act of provocation. At 9:10 a.m., as the USS Gerald R. Ford sailed near Greenland's waters, the crew noticed that the radar signals were becoming more concentrated. Within moments, several incoming missiles were detected. These weren't just any missiles. These were Iranian-made Hisa-Fateh cruise missiles, developed with a unique guidance system designed to overcome standard anti-missile defenses. The missiles were launched from 2 Iranian frigates, which had closed in on the aircraft carrier from different directions. They were cleverly camouflaged, appearing as simple merchant ships until they revealed their true intentions. The crew of the Gerald R. Ford had only seconds to react as the missiles came at them, their stealth capabilities making them almost impossible to intercept in time. The first missile hit the forward section of the USS Gerald R. Ford, striking the aircraft hangar with devastating force. The explosion sent a shockwave through the ship, tearing apart parts of the superstructure. Fires erupted as the advanced aircraft aboard the ship were destroyed, and the aircraft carrier's crew was forced into immediate firefighting and damage control operations. But the attack wasn't over. In a move that startled even the most experienced analysts in the Pentagon, the Iranian fleet didn't stop with the missile strike. The Iranian submarines, 2 Kilo-class subs, had been lurking beneath the icy waters, waiting for the right moment to strike. The submarine's attack was just as precise. With sophisticated sonar technology, they fired torpedoes at the Gerald R. Ford, targeting the vessel's vulnerable midsection. The torpedoes were designed to strike below the waterline, potentially crippling the ship's propulsion and rendering it immobile. These were no ordinary torpedoes. They were equipped with warheads that could inflict catastrophic damage to the carrier's hull. Fortunately for the crew, the ship's countermeasures worked to intercept one of the torpedoes, but the other detonated, causing significant flooding in the ship's lower decks. Crew members scrambled to contain the damage, but time was running out. Meanwhile, the 2 remaining Iranian frigates closed in on the Gerald R. Ford, their guns now trained on the wounded vessel. The frigates, equipped with a new type of surface-to-surface missile, unleashed another wave of attacks. These missiles were capable of penetrating even the most advanced defense systems, and they were armed with warheads designed to create fires and explosions upon impact. Another missile hit near the ship's flight deck, causing the carrier's aircraft elevator to collapse, further hindering the ship's ability to launch its planes in defense. The entire attack was over within the span of 15 minutes, but the consequences were monumental. The USS Gerald R. Ford, despite its massive size and advanced technology, had been crippled. The damage was extensive. Several aircraft were destroyed, parts of the superstructure were severely damaged, and the ship's defensive systems were temporarily compromised. The Pentagon immediately ordered a counter-response, but the reality of the situation began to sink in. A coordinated attack had taken place in an area previously thought to be safe. Iran had struck at one of the crown jewels of the U.S. Navy, sending a clear message to Washington. They were ready to challenge America's military dominance. In the aftermath of the assault, questions began to arise about how Iran had managed to execute such a well-planned and successful attack. Intelligence agencies soon discovered that Iran had been tracking the movements of the USS Gerald R. Ford for weeks, learning its patrol routes and preparing a strategy to take it down. This wasn't an impulsive attack. It was part of a larger strategy aimed at asserting Iran's presence in the region and challenging U.S. influence in the Arctic and beyond. The question on everyone's mind was whether this was the beginning of a broader conflict or a one-off attack designed to send a message. But one thing was clear. The balance of power in the region had just shifted dramatically. As the attack on the USS Gerald R. Ford unfolded and the Pentagon quickly grasped the scale of the damage, the U.S. Navy had no choice but to act swiftly. Within minutes of the strike, a flurry of orders was issued to respond to the attack, to regain control, and to prevent any further escalation. The chain of command swung into motion as multiple warships, submarines, and aircraft were deployed in an attempt to stabilize the situation. The Pentagon's immediate priority was to protect the remaining naval assets in the region and to send a clear signal that such attacks would not go unanswered. The U.S. Navy swiftly dispatched a carrier strike group led by the USS Abraham Lincoln, which had been stationed in the North Atlantic. Along with this, 2 nuclear-powered attack submarines, the USS Seawolf and USS Virginia, were ordered to head toward the affected area. The rapid deployment of these forces was a clear indication that the U.S. was not only focused on defending its assets, but also preparing for a possible retaliatory strike. In addition, the U.S. Air Force was notified, and combat air patrols were launched, with fighter jets circling the area to protect the remaining vessels and maintain air superiority. The U.S. command was clear. This attack would not be allowed to go unpunished. Meanwhile, Iranian forces had already begun retreating, their fleet moving quickly through international waters, possibly aware of the U.S. response. However, this was not a simple retreat. Iran's naval forces seemed to be preparing for a further escalation. Satellite images and intelligence reports indicated that Iranian frigates were heading towards an undisclosed location near the Strait of Gibraltar, and their movements suggested they might be attempting to set up a new defensive position. Reports also emerged that Iran had begun conducting extensive missile drills, further hinting at their intention to continue testing the resolve of the U.S. and its allies. Despite the damage to the USS Gerald R. the attack had not crippled the entire U.S. Navy's operational capabilities, and Iran seemed aware that the next phase of this conflict could escalate dramatically. The situation was now at a tense crossroads. The Pentagon had to decide whether to retaliate immediately or to wait for further information. President of the United States, alongside his military advisors, convened an emergency meeting at the National Command Center to discuss the available options. Several members of the military leadership argued for swift retaliation, targeting key Iranian naval installations and missile sites in the Persian Gulf. Others, however, cautioned against an immediate strike, warning that this could ignite a full-scale war and draw other nations into the conflict. A decision was made to hold off on direct military retaliation and focus instead on diplomatic channels, at least in the short term, to avoid an outright escalation. The U.S. had already imposed sanctions on Iran, but this attack brought the possibility of an armed confrontation closer than ever before. The global community, meanwhile, reacted with a mixture of shock and disbelief. NATO allies immediately began consultations to assess the threat posed by Iran's sudden and audacious action. Some European countries, particularly the UK and Germany, expressed concerns about the potential for further Iranian aggression. They called for restraint, warning that this attack could destabilize the region and threaten international shipping lanes. However, some NATO members, especially those with strong ties to the U.S., supported a more aggressive stance, emphasizing the need for a firm response to protect NATO's credibility and to send a clear message to Iran. The United Nations called for an emergency session, urging all parties involved to de-escalate the situation and engage in dialogue. But as the world watched, it became clear that a delicate balance would be needed to avoid a conflict of catastrophic proportions. On the Iranian side, the attack was being hailed as a strategic victory. Iranian officials, speaking from Tehran, claimed that they had successfully crippled one of the most advanced military assets in the world and sent a resounding message to the United States. Iran's president, in a televised speech, declared that the attack was a warning against continued U.S. military presence in the Middle East and the surrounding regions. He called on other nations to support Iran's efforts to challenge what he called the unilateral dominance of the United States, framing the incident as part of a broader campaign to assert Iranian influence on the global stage. The attack on the USS Gerald R. was portrayed as part of a long-standing strategy to weaken U.S. influence and disrupt its military operations, particularly in the Mediterranean and the Arabian Gulf. But what Iran had not anticipated was the full range of consequences that would follow. Though the U.S. Navy was initially caught off guard by the scale of the attack, it soon adapted to the new realities of the situation. The Gerald R. though damaged, remained afloat, and its crew worked tirelessly to control the fires and flooding that had ravaged much of the ship's lower decks. The ship's ability to launch aircraft was temporarily hindered, but not permanently disabled. The remaining aircraft on the deck were grounded, but the U.S. Navy's air superiority was not entirely compromised. As damage control teams continued their work, a powerful message was sent to Tehran. The USS Gerald R. might have been struck, but the United States was far from finished. The larger implications of this attack were felt almost immediately. The escalation of tensions in the region, coupled with the global economic implications, was enough to send shockwaves through international markets. Oil prices spiked as fears grew over the stability of the Strait of Hormuz, a vital global shipping route for oil and gas exports. Nations reliant on oil exports began to voice concerns about the potential disruption of energy supplies, while others feared that this conflict could spill over into other areas of the Middle East. The financial markets, reacting to the heightened geopolitical risk, saw sharp declines, with investors scrambling to move their assets into safer havens. As the days passed, the military buildup in the region continued to grow. The U.S. Navy and Air Force maintained their presence in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, while Iranian forces, aware of the increasing U.S. presence, began to dig in. With both sides reinforcing their positions, the world braced for the next stage of the crisis. A full-scale war between the two powers was still unlikely, but the possibility of smaller, more targeted skirmishes, possibly involving proxy forces or cyber attacks, remained very real. At this moment, the world stood at the edge of a precipice. Could this incident be contained? Or was it the spark that would ignite a broader conflict? The coming days would be crucial in determining whether diplomacy could hold sway or whether military escalation would define the future of U.S.-Iran relations. In the end, only time would tell how this daring attack would reshape the balance of power in the Middle East and beyond.